Hello from the sun-baked southern Arizona desert. Today we're going to take a look at the Apostle Thomas and ask some questions. What would you do? When we think of Thomas the Apostle, what is the first thing that probably pops into our minds? Doubting Thomas. Perhaps the most famous nickname given in later years to someone from the Bible. Here was a man who willingly and passionately followed Jesus and was able to personally hear his teachings, get to know him very well, and witness his miracles. Yet, Thomas doubted the resurrection, the essential part of Christ's existence for us. Thomas gives us a certain smugness about ourselves. After all, here was a disciple who doubted, and we have never seen Jesus but believe. Christ even said we are blessed for doing so. Certainly, that makes us better than Thomas. It is an almost, aha, gotcha moment. However, before we get too comfortable, there are quite a number of things we need to first consider. We don't know how Thomas became a disciple, but he is listed with the others in Matthew 10:3, Mark 3:18, and Luke 6:15. This will become significant as we shall see in a few minutes. If Christ had selected you to be one of the 12 disciples at that time, what would you do? How would you have responded? Many of us, without hesitation, would immediately say they would have accepted. But let's think about this some more. Even before Christ's death, being a disciple of the Lord was risky business. It is hard for us in the U.S. to relate to it. Unless we have lived in a society with a real threat to our lives for following Jesus, it may be difficult to appreciate the realities of doing so. The disciples were faced not with one, but two governing bodies, the Jewish religious officials and the Romans, whose priority was on maintaining order. The Romans would pretty much leave the Jewish society alone if they would police themselves. So the Jewish officials wanted to maintain submission in order to keep the Romans from doing it. Just mind your business, don't rock the boat, you'll be okay. Well, as we know, the ministry of Jesus was anything but. So what would you do? I've done several cross-country household moves. Right now, I'm comfortable here where I am. I don't want to move again, at least not anytime soon. I still have some good opportunities that come to me that would require yet another cross-country move, but I'm comfortable enough, don't want to do it. Moves are no fun. So here was a man, Thomas, who dedicated the rest of his life to being on the road. In fact, as we shall see later, to the extreme. He was the ultimate road warrior. These travels did not lead to greater comforts either. So what would you do? There's actually little written about Thomas in the Bible. However, there is enough for us to ask some more what would you do's. Thomas and the disciples were with Jesus when Jesus received word that a friend Lazarus, whom he cared deeply about, had died in Judea. Jesus told his disciples that he and they will go back to Judea. Let us go back to Judea, John 11:4. Jesus had plans to resurrect Lazarus. The disciples reminded Jesus that just a short time before, the Jews had tried to stone Jesus there. It was Thomas who said, "Let us also go, that we may also die with him." John 11:16. This was an act of raw courage and deep faith. Thomas was the most courageous of the disciples there. So, what would your reply to Jesus have been? What would you do? Thomas is teaching us that when the Lord invites us on a course where the outcome is uncertain and it is not laid out for us of what waits ahead, then it's okay. I trust him. The disciples went and were able to witness a spectacular miracle. It's also interesting to note that Jesus could have simply said, "I must go back to Judea." However, he invited his disciples to participate with him on this venture and miracle. No different for us. Jesus invites us to participate in his works if we will come along for the journey. Thomas was not the first and the only disciple to doubt the resurrection. When the resurrection was reported to the disciples, they had doubts. Let's look at two of them. Mark 16:11. When they heard he was alive and had been sent by her, Mary Magdalene, they refused to believe it. Mark 16:14. Afterward, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at the table, and he reproached them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had risen. There are also instances described in Matthew and Luke. This is to say that all the disciples had their doubts. If Jesus being alive was reported to you, what would you do? John 20:24-25. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." There's a lot in here. We don't know why Thomas was not with the other disciples. This highlights the importance of not reading a single verse and drawing inferences and conclusions. You need to read all the passages describing the event. If we read verse 24 and stop, we might conclude that Thomas had dropped out. Remaining a disciple or close follower of Jesus after the crucifixion was one of great risk, as the authorities wanted to root out anyone passing what they saw as false teachings to promote insurrection. It would have been easy for any of the disciples to simply kept a low profile, minded their own business, and faded away into history. What would you have done? Well, they did not fade away. Thomas did not either. In verse 25, they tell Thomas, "We have seen the Lord." This shows that Thomas remained in contact with the others and was considered part of them. He shared the risk with them. It also shows the disciples finally realized the resurrection was real. Then the famous passage, John 20:25, but he said it to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, put my finger where the nails were, put my hand in his side, I will not believe." I will not speculate on the cause of his doubt. That really would only sidetrack the focus of this reading, but only acknowledge it existed. However, I will say that in some respects, it was harder for the disciples to grasp the resurrection than us. Unlike us, they knew Jesus as the man in the flesh. They saw he was subject to pain and death. Knowing him in the flesh, and quite personally, gives one a completely different perspective that is difficult for us to understand. That's all I have to say about that. Have you had doubts? I think any Christian who says never is not being honest with him or herself or not recognizing it. Even the disciples had doubts at times. What is important is Thomas expressed those doubts. He did not say, great to hear, to perhaps remain in good graces with his fellow disciples and not really believe it. He was honest and confident enough to express it. And that's a lesson for us. If we have doubts, say so. Go to a clergy member, close Christian friend, and explain them. Also important is the response of the disciples. We do not know what they said, but Thomas was with them a week later behind locked doors, probably another indication of the danger of being together. This shows he was still part of the group. He was still accepted and included. An easy response from the disciples would have been, "Are you saying we are liars?" If someone today comes to you expressing doubts about Jesus' promises, how would you respond? If you were ministering to another and they said, "I can't really believe that," would you chastise and criticize them or work on inclusion with other fellow Christians? So Christ did appear to them in the room and said, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand, put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." First, Thomas responded immediately and without hesitation. Once his doubts were gone, he was all in. And as we shall see in a moment, he really was to the extreme. Jesus' response was a model for us. He did not criticize Thomas or belittle him or tell him to get out. He treated him with respect and invited him to find out the truth for himself. Isn't that what we should do? If we have doubts, go investigate. If we are unsure what something might be, then seek clarification. Actually, that's what Thomas did earlier. When Jesus was foretelling his death, it was unclear to Thomas what Jesus was talking about. He asked in John 14:5, Lord, we do not know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus clarified by replying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Let's look at Matthew 7:7-8, where Jesus said, Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks, the door will be opened. Thomas was seeking physical proof of the resurrection. Christ opened the door for him. He entered. So if you have doubts, ask. What happened to Thomas? He ended up becoming a missionary to southern India, certainly at the end of the known world to them. Some historical accounts have him even going to China and Indonesia, but while those have compelling arguments, they are unsubstantiated. We do know he was most probably martyred in the far south of India, in a town on the Bay of Bengal. As always, it seems, the apostles were looked upon as a threat to the authorities. In the late 1490s, Portuguese explorers went to establish missions in India, and they were shocked to find that there were already large Christian communities and churches already there, which attributed their founding to Thomas. So to sum up, what can we learn from Thomas? If you have doubts or are unclear, you are not alone. However, let them be known and seek out answers through prayer and dialogue with a minister or trusted Christian colleagues. If you are the recipient of someone expressing doubts or questioning a teaching, do not criticize them, but seek to help them. Even if you can't, connect with someone or others who may be able to do so. And speaking of criticism or misjudging, we can identify personally how history has treated Thomas. Have you ever been criticized or judged for something you did not do, or did not understand? If the ones doing so only took the time to look at the whole picture of what was going on, perhaps the challenges you were facing without help, they might have a different view. Lesson learned. Before we make a conclusion, let's look at the entire record. So before we make a conclusion about doubting Thomas, again, we need to look at his entire record in Scripture. So going forward, when we hear accounts or read about doubting Thomas, remember, there is more to that story. So next posting that will be up will be on the prophet Habakkuk. Certainly a global man for our times. He could easily fit in with us today. A really cool dude. So, join us then. Thanks.